They cuffed me in court right before the judge called for the pledge. Leah Monroe, 39, former Navy. The overhead fluorescents buzzed like angry bees, and my old seal patch pressed cold against my wrist under the steel. Ever get mistaken for trouble just by walking in the wrong door? Tell me, what would you have done? Bayfield, Wisconsin didn't wake up fast. It blinked. It yawned. And at 5:50 a.m. on November 8th, a stranger walked into Pinecone Corner Cafe, unnoticed almost. The sky outside was a steel gray, as if still deciding whether to let the sun rise. A soft mist curled off the lake, slinking between the old brick storefronts like it had done for generations. Inside the cafe, warmth hummed from under the linoleum floors, wrapping around the ankles of early risers who always sat in the same booths, said the same things, and drank the same coffee they had since 1974. A faded plaque above the sugar dispenser read, "Some heroes wear boots. Some wear silence." Mildred Holloway had nailed it there herself after her husband passed. She dusted it weakly, quietly. The stranger didn't touch the plaque. She didn't glance at it. She walked in like she had no reason to look up, like the air itself had always known her. Slim frame gray jacket, neutral slacks tucked into scuffed boots that didn't track a single wet mark, despite the damp sidewalk. She wore no makeup. Her brown hair was pinned simply, not tightly. She moved with the confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. That was the first detail Mildred noticed. The second was how the woman scanned the room without moving her head. Just a flicker in the eyes, table by table, corner to corner, before choosing the booth at the far back, facing both the door and the fogged window. She sat down silently, boots side by side, hands flat on the table, elbows in, like someone used to angles and coverage. Mildred approached slowly, pen already poised. "Morning," she said in her default register, not warm, not cold. "Coffee black, no sugar. And if the pecan slice is warm, I'll take that too," the woman said without hesitation, eyes on the laminated menu, though she never turned a page. That was the third detail. "She orders like she's been here for years," Mildred murmured on her way to the counter. And she had just started slicing the pecan pie, still warm from last night's bake, when the bell above the door jingled again. Walt Granger entered with the same slow gait he'd used since his third back procedure. Trucker hat, thick flannel hunting jacket with a frayed cuff. He nodded once at Mildred, same as every morning, then swept the room with a glance. That's when he saw her. The woman didn't look up. She sipped her coffee, held the mug with both hands, elbows now drawn in close. Her shoulders never hunched, her breathing steady. There was no idle twitching, no fidgeting, not even a check of the phone. Walt's brow furrowed. He took a seat at the counter, 2 stools down from the Caraways, who were arguing affectionately over whether the VA had sent the wrong prescription again. Mrs. Caraway, despite her hearing aid being turned too low, gave Walt a knowing smirk. Someone knew Walt didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the woman's reflection in the metal napkin holder. The way she held her spoon, dipped it once into the pecan slice, never stirred. Measured. Deliberate. "She remind you of anyone?" Mildred asked softly, handing over his regular eggs over medium rye toast and sausage links. "She sits like a seal," Walt muttered before realizing he'd said it aloud. Mildred blinked. "Excuse me," Walt shook his head slightly. "Probably nothing. But at Coronado there was this, never mind. Could just be posture." Leah Monroe, though no one knew her name yet, finished her slice, sipped the last drop of coffee, and placed a 5 and 2 ones beneath the lip of the plate. She stood without scraping the bench coat already zipped. As she walked past the counter, she nodded once toward Mildred. Their eyes met for less than a second. At exactly 6:13 a.m., she stepped outside. The mist had begun to lift. Behind the counter, Mildred opened the register and found the tip $1 bill folded into a perfect triangle. At 7:02 the next morning, Leah opened the case, matte black military-grade foam, and assembled her rifle without a word. The gravel beneath her boots gave a slow crunch as she knelt, motion fluid, like she'd done this 1,000 times on 1,000 mornings. No hesitation, no second glance. The low fog hugged the pine trees that framed Bayfield's modest shooting range. A few birds chirped lazily in the cold, their wings sounding brittle in the still air. Walt Granger leaned on the side booth, hands wrapped around his old USS Hardhat mug. The coffee inside had cooled, but he hadn't noticed. His eyes followed Leah's fingers as she snapped each component together. That breathing, slow inhale, pause, release wasn't learned at any academy. It was baked in, forged somewhere harsher. 30 years earlier, he'd seen the same thing on a ship deck during dawn drills before deployments. Measured, exact, unteachable. Across the range, Steve McConnell shuffled in phone in hand. His beanie was pulled low, and the wisps of his vape cloud mixed with the fog. He tapped into the Bayfield Buzz Facebook group, chuckling to himself as he angled his phone to catch Leah in frame. The caption he typed read, "Somebody call Homeland Deputy Carla Ruiz, stood at Station 6 unpacking her own gear. Her ponytail slipped through the back of her department cap, and her leather gloves squeaked as she flexed her fingers." She was here for routine practice, she told herself, but her instincts were never off duty. She noticed Leah immediately. No badge, no clipboard, no sign-in, and she hadn't passed through the office where range check-ins were mandatory. Ruiz paused mid-load, watching Leah sight the wind, with nothing but closed eyes and a slight tilt of her chin. No scope, no weather app, just breath and feel. The first shot cracked the air like frost splitting a windshield. Then another, and another. 5 bullseyes. 800 yards. Clean. Steve's camera twitched. He muttered, "No way," but kept rolling. Ruiz lowered her own weapon. She walked slowly toward Leah, eyes calm but voice deliberate. "Ma'am, this is a registered facility. Do you have your badge on you?" Leah didn't flinch. She released the bolt gently and stood tall and straight, rifle angled down and open. "I'm not carrying ID. If that's a problem, I'll come with you." There was no defiance in her tone, just fact. Ruiz hesitated, scanning Leah's stance. No tension, no evasion, the kind of calm that made her skin prickle. Walt, still under the awning, sipped what remained of his cold coffee. He didn't intervene, didn't even shift weight. But his hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his flip phone. He scrolled to a number labeled simply Briggs, Retina CDR. He left a voicemail. "Hey, it's Walt. I think I've seen her kind again. Might want to check the rosters." Steve, now crouching behind a bench, zoomed in on the exchange. The comment count on his stream ticked upward. 20, 40, 100. Ruiz gestured softly toward her cruiser. Leah nodded once, then walked ahead of the deputy, arms visible, strides even. The cruiser door opened with a muted creak. She entered without being prompted. Ruiz looked back once, caught Walt's eye, but he gave nothing away. Just lifted his mug in a slow, somber toast. Steve's phone buzzed in his pocket. Notifications swarmed like bees. He refreshed the post. Shares 502, new caption auto-filled by a commenter. Navy ghost detained in Bayfield. As Ruiz drove off with Leah, the fog seemed to curl closer to the trees, as if listening. In holding cell 2, she sat like she had somewhere more important to be, and knew she'd get there. The metal bench was cold. The wall behind her peeled in slow, quiet curls like it had long since given up on being presentable. Leah Monroe rested both feet flat on the floor, knees slightly apart, spine straight. The window beside her was narrow, but offered a view of the small oak tree outside, its brown leaves shivering under the overcast sky. Deputy Ruiz leaned against the hallway wall just beyond the cell. She was trying not to fidget. There was something about the way Leah didn't move, didn't blink too often, didn't shift restlessly, that made the cell feel like hers, not a place she'd been put in. Her eyes tracked the wind in the branches beyond the glass head, still only her gaze drifting. Ruiz thought about the range again. That breathing, that poise, the way she'd agreed to come in without so much as a glance sideways. Calm, but not resigned, like someone who'd calculated the variables before Ruiz had even walked up. The sheriff's office had a smell coffee left on warm for too long, the undertone of mildew and something sharper that never quite faded from the evidence locker. The lights above Holding 2 flickered once. Ruiz muttered under her breath and rubbed her forehead. From the front entrance, boots approached on hardwood, slow and deliberate. Walt Granger stepped in holding a small brown paper bag in one hand and a to-go cup in the other. Mildred sent these, he said. Said something about manners and pecans. Ruiz raised an eyebrow. He handed her a folded napkin tucked around the bar. She wrote a note. For the guest. Ruiz hesitated, then walked the items to Leah's cell. The keys jingled softly as she opened the food hatch. From the cafe, she said, sliding the napkin and the drink through. Leah met her eyes briefly, nodded once. Thank you. Her voice was barely more than breath, but it wasn't weak. Ruiz caught herself standing still longer than necessary, waiting for something, an explanation, a glance, maybe just a question. But Leah only unfolded the napkin with careful fingers, read the note silently, and began eating with precise bites. Behind the glass, Walt didn't move. He simply watched. When Leah caught his gaze for a moment, he gave her the smallest tilt of his head. She returned to her food. Ruiz turned back toward her desk, trying to shake the odd tightness in her chest. She ran a standard check on Leah's fingerprints again. No hits. Not in state. Not in national. Not even flagged. Nothing. She tapped the desk rhythmically, then opened the evidence drawer. Leah's belongings sat in a sealed tray, a small notepad blank on most pages. The last few were filled with tight handwriting, times coordinates, weather notations. No names, no addresses, no context. The radio on her hip crackled, but she ignored it. She stood, walked back to the cell with a bottle of water. Thought you might want this, she offered. Leah took it with her left hand. As she reached the edge of her sleeve, lifted just slightly, revealing a pale mark just below the wrist, faded ghost-like, nearly invisible. Not a tattoo, not recent. Something older, sun-bleached and broken into the skin over time. Ruiz didn't ask, but something inside her stirred an unease wrapped in familiarity. A memory she couldn't pin. Leah drank the water slowly, then folded the napkin from the pecan bar into a perfect square, then again into a triangle. She set it beside the empty cup and returned to watching the tree. Walt had long since left the front desk, but hadn't gone home. Ruiz saw his truck still parked just outside when she stepped into the hallway. She leaned against the window arms, folded, lost in thought. Her phone buzzed. Not a call. Not a text. Just a single encrypted alert ping from a source she didn't recognize. Do not interrogate. Hold for federal arrival. Classified level 4. 3 minutes into the arraignment, the double doors creaked open, and every veteran in the courtroom stood at attention. The sound wasn't loud, but it moved through the chamber like a tremor. Bench by bench, the rustle of wool coats and shifting knees followed. Hands touched foreheads or hearts. Silence unfurled like a flag dropping at half-mast. Leah Monroe sat in the defendant's seat, wrists cuffed lightly in front of her, palms up, motionless. She didn't turn her head. Her eyes remained fixed on the grain of the table, unmoved by the swell of the room. Judge Mabel Hargrove narrowed her eyes over the top of her bifocals. She'd been military once, long ago, and instinct drew her gaze to the figure striding calmly down the aisle. Admiral Richard Beck wore his dress blues like they were stitched to his bones. No medals clanked. No words announced his entrance. His face gave away nothing. But the room already knew who he was. Behind him, Walt Granger remained still in the back row, hands clenched on his cap, breath caught in his throat. At the front of the courtroom, Leah's public defender had just begun his plea for delay. "Your Honor, my client has refused to speak with me in any meaningful capacity, and we're still unsure of the charges." Judge Hargrove held up a hand, silencing him mid-sentence. Her eyes were on the court officer, who had just received a plain envelope, no markings, handed over by Beck, without a word. She opened it. Seconds passed. Her brow furrowed, then smoothed. She leaned back slowly in her chair, lips pressing into a single white line. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady. "All charges against Ms. Monroe are hereby dropped." A pause. "This matter has been reclassified under Federal National Security Jurisdiction Level 4. This courtroom is now closed to further inquiry." Beck remained beside the officer's podium, hands clasped lightly behind his back. His eyes never left Leah. Ruiz, seated behind the partition, didn't know when she had stood, only that she now felt cold. Her pulse thumped hard in her neck. Leah turned for the first time. Not to the judge, not to the audience, but toward Beck. He stepped closer, leaned slightly, and said so quietly that only a few in the front could hear. "You did your part, Commander. Now let us do ours. No ceremony, no dramatic flair. Just that." Judge Hargrove stood. The bailiff remained still. The room seemed to pulse with unspoken understanding, though no one could name what had just passed between them. Leah rose. The officer beside her unlocked the cuffs slowly. They dropped into his palm with a whisper. Ruiz lowered herself back into her chair, uncertain whether to be ashamed or relieved. She caught Leah's eye. The calm hadn't faded, but something softer glinted there now, like she was finally seeing Ruiz, not just observing her. As Leah and Beck turned to leave, one of the elderly veterans near the door raised a slow, firm salute. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. Walt's whisper barely stirred the air. They handcuffed a seal. By the time the doors closed behind them, no one in the room had spoken. Across town, Mildred stood behind the counter of Pinecone Corner Cafe, eyes fixed on the old TV mounted above the register. The ticker tape at the bottom read, "Local woman released. Details sealed by Pentagon." She didn't say a word, just reached for a clean dish towel and wiped down the counter slow and steady, like it was just another Thursday. Leah returned to Pinecone Corner the next day, ordered the same meal. The room fell silent. The cafe had never truly been loud, but that morning it was quieter than usual, like the walls were holding their breath. Outside, small flags lined Main Street, their edges flicking softly in the cold breeze. The bell over the cafe door gave its familiar chime, and every head turned. Leah walked in wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater, no insignia, no boots. She moved with the same steady rhythm as before, but something had shifted. Her posture no longer said passing through. It said home, or at least something close to it. Mildred stood behind the counter, drying a mug with a cloth she didn't realize she was holding. The triangle folded dollar bill still sat in her tip jar, untouched, a quiet memorial. Leah's voice was gentle but clear. Coffee black. Same pie if you still have it. A few murmurs passed through the cafe like the wind through leaves. No one said much, but chairs shifted slightly. A couple of hats were removed. An elderly man near the jukebox gave a small nod, then turned back to his crossword, without finishing the clue. Mildred disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, returning not only with a plate, but a soft hand-embroidered napkin folded neatly underneath the fork. She slid the plate across the counter without ceremony, eyes warm. "Thank you," she said, "for your silence." Leah inclined her head slightly, then took her seat in the corner booth, same one as before. She looked out the window, her eyes tracing the breeze tugging at the flag across the street. Deputy Ruiz entered a few minutes later, her uniform jacket unzipped, scarf hanging loose. She hesitated by the door, then made her way toward Leah's booth. She didn't sit. "I wanted to apologize," Ruiz said, voice low. "I didn't know, but I still should have." Leah raised a hand slightly, not to stop her, just to pause the apology where it stood. "You followed orders," she said. "That matters." Ruiz blinked once. She gave a short, almost embarrassed nod and turned toward the counter. Mildred had already poured her coffee. Walt Granger came in not long after. He walked slower than usual, as if time itself asked him to be present for this moment. He took the bench across from Leah without asking, placed his cap beside him, and set his hands on the table. "You know," he said, "we don't always know what to salute. You made it easy." Leah didn't smile, but her eyes softened. From the back, the door opened once more, and a boy in an ROTC uniform stepped in, nervous cheeks pink from the wind and something more. He spotted Leah, immediately stood straight, and saluted, not quite perfectly, but earnestly. Leah returned it with a warm nod, her hand rising just enough to make the gesture complete. The boy sat quickly, face flushed. No one teased him. No one needed to. Walt reached into his coat pocket and slid a small box across the table. "I found this in the drawer where I keep things. I don't want to remember," he said. "It's yours." Leah opened it. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a navy ring, aged but polished. She ran her thumb across the surface, then reached into her own coat and pulled out a folded note. She slid it back with the ring. Some things, the note read, should stay in the light. They sat in silence after that. Not awkward, not heavy, just still. Near the register, Mildred reached up to the old TV and clicked it off. The cafe dimmed just a little, falling back into its natural quiet. She set the dish towel down, looked toward no one in particular, and said, "Heroes don't need headlines. They just need breakfast." Behind her, a new frame had appeared on the wall, no photo, just a simple piece of paper in a child's handwriting. "Some of us are always around." 6 months later, spring kissed Bayfield, and on the farthest lane of the shooting range, a new girl aimed through the wind. She couldn't have been more than 22, auburn hair pulled tight beneath a navy blue cap. Her stance was clean, breath steady. The rifle, loaned, not owned, rested in her arms like it belonged there. Walt Granger leaned against the edge of the booth, thermos tucked into his elbow, watching. He'd learned not to interrupt breathing like that. You waited until the round was spent, the moment between stillness and recoil passed. The shot cracked softly, echoing into the tree line. A clean bullseye. Walt sipped, smiled to himself, then muttered, "Grip's right. Breath is better." But she doesn't know she's got it yet. The girl reset unfazed. No high fives, no glance around for praise. Just a breath, another round. Further back, a man in a light windbreaker stood at the perimeter. He hadn't spoken since arriving, just offered a nod in greeting. He wore no badge, no insignia, just calm and presence. "She's the one Leah mentioned," he said finally. Walt didn't respond right away. The second shot landed, slight drift right. He nodded mostly to himself. "She said you'd know what to look for." The man continued. "She asked for here." Walt's voice was more observation than question. "She requested this range, this booth." The man turned slightly toward him. "And you?" Walt watched the girl reload. Her shoulders rose, lowered. Not tense, just ready. "I don't coach anymore," he said, though it wasn't an argument. "Don't need a coach. She just needs someone to know she's not invisible." Walt thought about that. About all the years behind counters, behind scopes, behind grief. "You seen her shoot?" before he asked. The man shook his head. "Just video." Leah vouched. Walt glanced sideways. "She's not wrong often." The man stepped forward, placed a plain envelope on the bench beside Walt. From her. Walt waited until the man had walked away, boots crunching softly over gravel. Only then did he open the envelope. Inside was a single patch. Dark green background, black thread. No emblem. No eagle. Just one word stitched cleanly across the center: observer. The stitching was tight, careful, like it had been done with thought. He ran his thumb across it, feeling each loop. Another shot rang out. Another bullseye. Walt didn't cheer. He didn't even smile wide. Just watched her breathing, measured, precise. Familiar. "She sees it," he whispered. "Just like Leah." As the girl cleaned her weapon, packed slowly, respectfully, Walt stood. He walked toward the small tin he kept in his truck, the one for coffee change and things that didn't need much explaining. He placed the patch beside it. The old radio on the dash hummed as he started the engine. Bridge over troubled water leaked softly through the static, as if the station knew it was the right time for it. He pulled onto the main road, tires crunching softly, and began to whistle. And as the truck faded from view back at Pinecone Corner Cafe, the counter still bore the folded dollar bill, untouched, triangular, and eternal. A voice, clear but distant, filtered in, never spoken aloud, just written once on a page now folded in Walt's glove box. "You saw me when others didn't. That's why you'll see what comes next." Keep watching Walt. In a town where the loudest stories often go unheard, it was a quiet woman with folded dollars and a steady gaze who reminded them what valor really looked like. No fanfare, no headlines, just presence. Kindness given without need for recognition has a way of echoing further than any medal ever could. Sometimes the greatest strength is the ability to remain unseen and still choose to protect. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps it's time to notice the quiet heroes around you. Like light through morning mist, their grace may already be guiding your way.